How to turn something that sounds like this to something that sounds like this. Drum and bass music at its core is about experimentation. The genre is tied closely to technology, and as technology has evolved, so has the music. In the late 2000s, I found that drum and bass music started to plateau, and things started to sound the same and uninspiring. That's why when D-Bridge and Instrumental presented the AUTONOMIC podcast series, the entire community started to feel excited again because there was something fresh in the scene. Every month, I would look forward to the new podcast that would come out where D-Bridge and Instrumental would present their favorite music from artists in their circle that were pushing the boundaries of this music within the confines of 170 beats per minute. And new ideas started to emerge. If you've never heard of the AUTONOMIC podcast series, I highly recommend you listen to it, starting with Layer 1. You can find it down in the link below. So today I'm going to work on a minimal drum and bass track inspired by the AUTONOMIC podcast series. And I'll be using Shaperbox 3 from our sponsor today, Cableguys, to facilitate our creative session. Shaperbox 3 is an awesome tool that allows you to manipulate your music and unlock new patterns. You can learn more about Shaperbox 3 down in the links below. With a few basic concepts, I'll show you how you can convert something that sounds uninspired and mundane into something fun and interesting. By the way, my name is Stranger, and if you want to improve your music production and sound design, especially with dance music and drum and bass, this channel is for you. Anyway, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so I'm going to show you how I started this beat. So I just had a basic two-step beat, regular hi-hat on an 8th pattern on every 8th, so nothing special. And then here's my snare, again, very standard, just a snare on the 2nd and 4th beat. Now with the kick, we can experiment a little more. So we have a kick on the 1, obviously. With the minimal styles of drum and bass, you can kind of experiment with the kick position. So you can try more uncommon kick positions, such as over here. And we can add one over here. Some of the sounds of minimal drum and bass and that AUTONOMIC sound is actually inspired by techno, deep techno, and that kind of thing. So the kick sometimes has some prominence. There's definitely some techno influence in minimal drum and bass, especially the AUTONOMIC sound. So there is a play with interesting drum positions and kick positions. Okay, and then I layered it with this break beat. So that's the drum section, and then we can layer it with more harmonic elements such as pads and stabs, and we're going to be writing in the key of A minor. So one of the common chords I like to use is just the A minor synth. Again, nothing out of the ordinary, very basic, so it's every other white key if you're playing from A. So and minor chords are used a lot, especially in older Detroit techno in the stabs. So this kind of sound definitely influenced my production. And using repetitive minor triad stabs is definitely a thing with that techno sound. So I'm just repeating it using a dotted quarter note pattern here. That boom, 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 boom. We talk about that a lot on my channel. Then I decided to add another pad layer using the Juno 60 for a vintage sound. So I have the A minor triad again, so A, C, E. Now this time I wanted to add a bit of jazziness, so I'm adding an additional note, which is the 7th. Simply just skip the next white note and play this one here. So it's every other white note. Once you start playing minor triads and the sounds, you start to memorize that pattern. It always sounds like that dun 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 dun. So it's pretty easy to identify those minor chords. Of course, if you have Ableton, you can also use the scale feature to select A minor and then hide all the unnecessary notes, and you see it's every other white note. And we're going to actually create a chord progression here. Simply, we're going to copy the chords and shift them chromatically. So taking this, we can go up like here and like that, and we can extend the first chord, and you have this. Now, I actually wanted to go into the filter cutoff in the Juno and automate the filter. So using a step ladder approach, I have this kind of pattern to automate the filter cutoff. Then I'm using Vital simply to play a square wave bass. And again, it's nothing special, nothing inspiring. It's just playing one note, playing the A key. Finally, I layered it with this vocal sample from Splice. I just pitched it down by 4 semitones to match the key of our track. Hey babe, hey babe, hey babe, hey babe. And this was the resultant track. So to me, this composition sounds pretty standard, something I would probably come up with during an uninspired session. So in the next step, I'm going to use Shaperbox 3 to show you how I can turn something that sounds rather mundane and uninspired into something more interesting and exciting. By setting some basic parameters or using a couple presets within Shaperbox 3, we can unlock some creative possibilities. So first, let's talk about the hi-hats. Sometimes programming hi-hats can get pretty mundane and boring, and typically most producers use the same pattern. It's that repeated 8th note pattern. But I think there's opportunity to make your hi-hats more interesting and therefore your music more exciting. Especially with the style of drum and bass that we're working on, it does open up the possibilities where we can experiment with patterns. So Shaperbox's Time Shaper is a really great tool to unlock new patterns. Essentially, Time Shaper is kind of like a beat rearranger where you're able to manipulate the pattern and create new patterns. So a quick way is to go into the pattern section at the bottom and try some of the presets. So you'll see the normal pattern playing in the waveform behind the graph, and then we can choose one of these presets. Essentially what it's doing is this horizontal line, the lower you go, the further back the timeline it goes. So if the beat that would normally play here would be shifted, and instead of playing the beat that normally would play here, it'll be playing a beat that was further back here. And you get some really interesting effects when you move the line further down, or you have some diagonal lines. You might get some reverse sounds or some pitched up effects or pitched down effects. I like this pattern. Let's play with this a little bit, make this our own. So I'm going to experiment with moving this one. And I like that. That's kind of like a glitchy, fast hi-hat pattern in this middle part. And that definitely makes our hi-hats more interesting now. Here's the hi-hat pattern with the beat. Much more funky. All right, let's manipulate the breakbeat. Now, I really enjoy using Shaperbox with breakbeats because you can get some really interesting chops using some of the presets. So here's the new browser section from Shaperbox, which easily allows you to implement any of their presets in their library, and they have some really helpful presets. So you don't need to program everything by scratch if you don't want to, because they have some great sounding starting points here. And I favorite a couple of these to show you guys. So here's the breakbeat on its own. Let's try this one. This is a great way to manipulate your breakbeat and add an interesting percussive layer behind your drum track. Also, another use is to create drum edits. We speak heavily about edits on this channel, how it's important to have interesting drum edits in your phrase, and this is a good way to add drum edits to your beat, especially if you do break-oriented music. This can give you some awesome results. I think we're going to use this one. And that's sounding fresh. The next step, we're going to take that square bass, which is a pretty uninspired line. It's just playing one note. And we'll use a number of devices in Shaperbox to create an interesting bass line. We'll start with the filter. And this pattern is currently playing a 1-bar envelope. So we're kind of creating a wub by having it wub up and then down. And depending on how high you want the frequency to rise, just choose the correct height. Interestingly, the resonance has its own envelope as well, so you may want to adjust the resonance differently from the cutoff. Remember, there's a number of different filters that you can try here as well. I like how round that sounds with clean LP24. Now, a common trick I love to use to add some grittiness to bass lines and drum and bass is to add a layer of noise. So we can add Shaperbox's noise box here, or noise shaper. So here's a layer of white noise playing over the bass. Remember, there's tons of awesome noise sounds. There's also some organic sounds, which is pretty awesome when you layer it with bass. I like this water phone sample. Or some of the wind or scratchy noises. The tape is pretty good. Rattling record. So choose the noise you want to use and then shape it with the bass, right? So you can see the filter shaper behind the curve, so you can kind of match it. Now, I actually like to filter my noise, so there's actually a high pass here to remove some of the low frequencies of that noise. And then the secret to using noise is to distort the signal. When you combine a sub bass with noise and then you distort the two together, you get some really awesome grittiness and squishiness in the bass. So I'm adding Drive Shaper as the third device in the chain. Again, I'm using a pattern following the envelope of the other shapers. And remember, there's different clipping or distortion shapes here as well. But I like soft clip. Just has a nice warm sound. And finally, for the fourth stage, we're going to be adding the new liquid shaper, which is new to Shaperbox 3. Essentially what it is it's a flanger. This time I didn't say flanger. I know a lot of you guys grilled me for that. I've always called it flanger. However, you can switch between phaser or flanger. Now for this one, I'm using the phaser section. What I like about adding a phaser at the end of the stage is it makes the distorted bass sound more squishy, for lack of better terms. Notice how squishy that sounds, and you can play with the center frequency. Or the stages. Experiment. You get some interesting results. Yeah, but yeah, really cool results when you add a phaser to some distorted bass. Now remember, our square wave bass is only playing one note across the entire bar. But currently, the way it's set up with the envelopes, it's repeating every bar. So it's just playing one note. It's not very interesting. This is how it is currently. Now here's the best part of the trick. What you can do is you can use the kick to trigger Shaperbox. So on the sidechain section down here in Ableton, just choose kick as your sidechain input. Now go into each shaper within Shaperbox and click the audio button down here, and then this button that means external sidechain input. This will just tell Shaperbox to take the kick input as its external sidechain input. You see the note is repeating. Now you had to do it to each device in Shaperbox to get it to react. And now this envelope is re-triggering every time our kick is playing. And now our bass line is a lot more interesting. So what you can do now is experiment with the kick pattern. And when you change up the kick pattern, you'll get a new pattern with the bass line consequently. Super fun, and from here the possibilities are endless, and it's a really fun way to unlock and discover new bassline patterns. Now here's the real kicker, and no pun intended. Let's go back to the original kick pattern we had. Now what would happen if we add time shaper to the kick? Interesting question. So essentially what it's going to do is it's going to manipulate the pattern of our kick, and consequently it'll manipulate the pattern of our bass line. So watch this. Here's our original pattern. And just like that, you can have some interesting bass lines. The possibilities are endless. Pure brilliance. So let's take this one step further, and this might make your brain explode. So we currently have time shaper on the kick, which is manipulate the kick and consequently the bass line. And now what will happen if we go back to the bass and add a second time shaper following the bass? Pure bass mentality. Insane. Let's go back to that minor triad pad that we had. Now I'm using one of the presets in Shaperbox, but I want to show you what each shaper will do. So first we add some bit reduction to that pad to add some kind of lo-fi texture to it. And here's where Liquid Shaper really shines, when you create more stepped patterns like this. And this is playing a 1-bar pattern, so each one of these steps is playing a 16th note. So you're going to get an arpeggiated kind of sound. Watch this. Essentially, what each horizontal line represents is the center frequency of your phaser. So as you move this up or down, it's a higher frequency on that note. What I really like about this is there's this stereo function. So what this does is it offsets the center frequency between the left and right signal. So it gives you a stereo effect with each step. I love the techno and autonomic influence with this sound. Finally, there's this drive that moves slowly up the ramp for 4 bars to add some movement. And then we're using volume shaper, and this is set to a 16th note pattern. So essentially what it's doing is it's gating the notes of this liquid shaper to make it more tighter. So the more convex or deep the slope, the tighter the note. Just thought it adds a nice layer. And finally, there's a noise layer to add it. It's using the bubbles noise, which adds to this kind of bubbly sound. I just love how the noise shaper can add interesting textures on top of your sound design. I like that there's organic sounds. Adds a nice touch to your music. Finally, let's manipulate that Juno pad that we had. So I'm using one of the time shaper presets here to make it a more interesting pattern. Here's what we originally had. Not bad, but what happens if we add a time shaper? Just adds a nice chopped up interestingness to the rhythm. And then I add this little panner to give it some stereo effect. Finally, I'm using volume shaper to add a bit of a pumping effect, and I'm sidechaining this to the kick, so every time the kick plays, it just ducks the initial note. Fun stuff. Finally, here's that vocal sample that we had. Hey babe, hey babe, hey babe, hey babe. What's that time shaper on this vocal? Hey babe, hey babe, hey babe, hey babe. Nice little chopped up vocal effect, and add some reverb to that. So now that we have all the elements, I put a basic arrangement of the track. Essentially what we have is an intro here, and then we drop into the drums and the bass, and then I reintroduce the pads and vocals as the tracks progress. So after the recording of this video, I went back into the arrangement. I actually did one more thing to the hi-hats. I added a second Shaperbox, just like we did with the bass before. And what I'm doing is I'm adding a time shaper so that we have a different hi-hat that comes in. So the first section of the hi-hats, we have it playing regularly like this. And then after 16 bars, it goes like this. So this goes to show the power of using Shaperbox and using it outside the box, using 2 layers of it. I think you can get some really interesting results. So going back into the arrangement, you have the 16 bars intro here with the pad and vocals, and I left the Shaperbox off for some of the sounds so that when the track drops at the 16 bar mark, there's much more impact because of all the changes. And you'll see here that after 16 bars of the drop, I turn on Shaperbox for the kick, so you have that change up with the kick and the bass, as well the hi-hat also changes here as well, so to give it some variation. So this is a nice way to add some movement in your track and helps with the arrangement. And just so we have a comparison, here's the track before we added Shaperbox. And here's the beat after we added Shaperbox. It's quite a difference and much more interesting. So with that said, let's listen to the arrangement and listen to all the nuances and minute changes in the composition. Oh yeah, autonomic vibes. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching me turn something that was rather uninspiring into something that was more interesting and exciting musically. With tools such as Shaperbox 3, even beginner producers can add some complexity and some interestingness to their music. Remember to explore and experiment. That was the tenet of drum and bass music. It's also tied closely to our desire to learn as producers. And as we learn new things, it's quite possible we'll discover new sounds and patterns. Remember, if you want to pick up Shaperbox 3, you can learn more down in the links below. It's an awesome tool to unlock your creativity. Also, if you want to support my channel, you can pick up one of my products found in the links down below. I have a number of sample packs, preset packs, and Ableton kits to help you unlock your creativity. If you want to watch more jungle and drum and bass, you can check this video up here where I create a jungle track from one sample pack. Also, check this video out here where I use Noise Shaper to create some nasty, filthy bass lines. Alright, that's pretty much it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, keep practicing, and I'll see you at the next video.